Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Education USA's special session today. My name is Luke. I'll be your host today. We have students here as well. So for those of you who are not yet familiar with Education USA, we are a U.S. State Department network of advising centers located in more than 170 countries and territories. And we offer information on U.S. higher education and advising services to prospective students, all free of charge. And for today's webinar, we are going to focus on a topic of test optional policy. And as many of us are navigating the challenges of COVID-19, we see that many universities are going test optional. They are adopting this policy. Some are taking it as a temporary measure. Some are going more permanent with this change. So it's important for us to stay abreast of all these changes that are happening across the board. And today we have the privilege of welcoming Ms. Panitha Ott from Brown University. She's the Director of Admission. It's really late for her, so we really appreciate her time. It's close to midnight in Providence, Rhode Island. And we're gonna hear from her about how this policy worked for Brown University this past year and how it'll affect the applications cycle for the upcoming semester. There will be a short live Q&A session following the session. So feel free to use the chat function to type in your questions, or you can unmute yourself during the Q&A to ask and speak to Ms. Panitha directly, which is something that we prefer so that there's more clarity. So without further ado, I'm gonna give the floor to Panitha. Please introduce yourself briefly, and then you can share your screen and take us away. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Luke. And thank you, colleagues, REACTS, the Education USA. I am always happy to be working with Education USA because I feel that we are always on the same page. And I am proud of all of you for turning to them as well, because they are set up by the United States so to give you more information on all of the options. Of course, I want to also encourage you to turn directly to the institutions, but Education USA is always the place to start, and I'm always very happy when I see it on an application. So once again, my name is Panitha Ott, and I am at Brown University, which is a private Ivy League university on the East Coast of the United States, the 7th oldest university in the United States, and founded before the United States was. One thing about the founding fathers is they set up their educational institutions before they set up their country because they knew that people would need an education in order to vote and in order to run the country. And I always think that that's a very good message, that your education is something that nobody will ever take away from you and will help you in whatever you do, whether it be running your country or running your business or running your life or contributing to your community. So I'm proud of you for being a part of what historically in all places has been what we've respected most, bringing out the best in all of us. And I'll tell you a little bit about what you might expect to find in the United States. I hope, by the way, and I'm going to say this because it's going to be important in light of the topic, that you're all staying safe and healthy and that is first in your mind. Do not risk your life to take an exam. Because there are all sorts of options out there for you. So I will share my screen and we're going to talk about tests, but I'm going to talk about it in light of the application process, because in order to properly understand the way tests work, you have to be sure in your mind about what the application process is like. So here we go. There we go. Okay, we're going to start with the application process so that we can see the proper place of examinations. I think a lot of you and a lot of your parents, perhaps, I can't tell who's a student and who's a parent, but a lot of you may be used to thinking about exams as the way that students get into university from high school, and that is the way in most of the world. Your acceptance to a university is dependent upon an external examination or a final examination or a state examination, something that is offered at the end or toward the end of your final year of school, and your success is dependent on how you do. Enter the United States, where things are done differently, and to drive you crazy, there are more than 4,000 institutions of higher learning, and everybody does things slightly differently. So a lot of what I'm telling you is especially pertinent to Brown and schools like it, but a lot of what I'm telling you is true for all of them. Let's examine first the application process. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Common App because 900 institutions take it. And I want you to think about test exams in light of this. First, you're going to see, I don't know how many of you have seen an application, but if you go to commonapp.org, it will give you an example of what the basic tenets of an application are, whether or not the schools you're applying to use the Common App or not. First, they're going to ask you for biographical information. We want to know more about you because we like to place you in a context when we're making a decision. Are you the first in your family ever to go to college? Are you the first in your family to leave the country to go to college? That won't necessarily change the decision, but it allows us to enter with an understanding of who you are and the background you come from. We are going to ask, and this is the most important part of an application, although its relative importance depends on the school, a transcript of grades and a school profile. So the transcript will tell us what the last 3 or 4 years of your performance has been. Sometimes, and this may be true of some of you, there is an external examination that will have been offered at the end of your 10th grade year. Sometimes there is not anything like that. Sometimes you will have had the opportunity to take an external examination. This is particularly true if you are in a US system and you take an AP class early on, sometimes not. We will also ask the school to tell us a little bit about what the school is like, what kind of curriculum it offers, how many students there are. A school profile is something created for a lot of different people. It's created for colleges so that they get an idea of the school. It's created for parents so they get an idea of the school. Sometimes it's also important for real estate agents who try to sell property and homes around a school. So everybody wants something different from this. But what a university is looking for is an idea of what the curriculum is, of what class sizes are, and information that will give us a better idea of your context. That is going to be front, right, and center. Now, at a school like mine, which is Brown University, your transcript has to be stellar. At a school where that is not so selective, it just has to be decent. You have to have gone through your work. At a school that might specialize, say, in art. So Brown is right across the street from the Rhode Island School of Design. Grades will still be important, but what's more important, and you think I'll understand this, is your art portfolio. So they're going to look at that. Keep this in mind as we go down the list here. The essay, we ask to know a little bit more about you. We want to know how you write. That's the academic part of it. We want to hear your voice in those words, but we also want to get to know a little bit more about you, and you're given prompts by the Common App, such as describe a time that you failed, or describe a time that something that happened had an impact on you. So you'll see words like impact and experience, so think about the times that have affected you and let us know that. We ask for your teachers to tell us a little bit about you. And then we ask for those pesky tests. We ask sometimes for SAT, which is not the same as a US leaving exam. It was developed for different reasons. It's an exam to see how quickly you can read and comprehend, and also how your mathematical skills are, or the ACT, which will look at different kinds of skills you may have: verbal, mathematical, scientific, and so on. We might ask for, if you're in an IB, for the IB predictions or the IB results. If you were in the AP, for AP results, if you were in an A-level or GCSEs for those results, if you are in a national system for the results of the national system. Some schools, and this will drive you crazy, will say that they are test optional. Others will say that they're test blind. We'll go over those terms. So that may strike you as strange, but when you think about all of these other things that I described, maybe it's not so strange because it's part of everything. And then we'll talk about the interview later on. So again, we want to know your background. We want to know your context. We want to know what the stresses have been in your life. That's important to us because that's going to affect how you learned. If you had every opportunity in your life and you didn't use it, that says one thing. If you had no opportunities, but you made the most of the little that you had, that says something else. So when we're looking at academics, again, you may be thinking in terms of the exams, but we're looking at what courses you took. We're looking at the rigor of them. We're looking at how applicable they are. And for a liberal arts institution, we're looking for courses across the board that are theoretical. A more specialized institution might look at another set of courses. We look at your individual achievement as compared to others in your school. Maybe your school grade's hard. Sometimes there are motivational grades. We look at what your teachers have to say about you. And we look at exams because it provides us with a standard measure. However, because they are usually something that happened one afternoon or one morning at one point, they're not going to be as important, even for schools that require them, as a pattern of performance that you show us for 3 years. We also look at other academic experiences you might have, you might not have them. There might be a summer course, it might be an extra online course, anything else that you can tell us. Again, we will ask for the essay. So we want to know how you think. We want to know how you present an idea. We want to know if how your logic follows. Can you write something coherent? Some schools will ask very creative essays. So some schools often have their own essays as well. And front line and center. Why are you applying to this institution? Make sure you are answering that institution and you're not talking about another one. If you tell Brown how much you love Harvard, that's great that you love Harvard, but that hurts our feelings. You want to tell Brown how much you love Brown, and you want to tell Harvard how much you love Harvard. You want to tell us why, and you want to show that you understand the school and that there's a reason other than you heard the name or other than your favorite cousin went there. Some may be academic essays to talk about maybe a book that you read. My institution asks about community and what that means to you. Some schools will ask, I knew a program at Penn State that will ask you to compare the economies of a couple of countries. If the questions don't excite you, that says something. But this is going to tell us a lot about how you think and how and what's important to you. This is all to show you how little importance we place. We do place importance on standardized exams. I don't want to say it's little, but we also can live without them. We look at it, extracurriculars. That may seem really strange to you because probably the universities in your countries don't care about these things, but we want to see what interests you and if you can lead or if you can follow even, or if you have a particular talent that you want to share with us, or something that makes you human. That is important to us. So I put sewing down because who would think that a college might care about that? But if you put that down because you sew, it tells me that you weren't trying to impress me. You did it because you thought it important. One girl who sewed got together a club and they made things for people who were in places that it was cold and didn't have warm hats and scarves. Whoop. Now, finally, and before we get to the centerpiece of this, very often an interview is offered, sometimes by an alum, sometimes by an external agency, sometimes it depends on the school's policy, sometimes not at all. But I will tell you something that's new and exciting. There are a lot of schools that are now turning to technology. So my school just got rid of the interview for the first time this year. We used to have a core of 4,000 alums who interviewed you and sent reports and talked about what your interests were and how articulate you were and or not, and they were usually actually really good interviews. But we decided a couple of things. Since the interview couldn't be conducted in person, and part of this is the personal, we thought we would give students an opportunity to use another way to get to us. And because we couldn't, the other problem is we could not get to all of our applicants. So we said, you can upload a 2-minute video. And students now can control what they're going to tell us, and they can stand in front of a wall if they want, or whatever they want, and tell us about a little bit more about themselves in 2 minutes. So other schools have these kinds of alternatives. They use technology in a creative way so that you can use your creativity through technology to give us a little glimpse about what you're like. So given what I just told you, why are external exams important? Well, you know what? We can make a decision without them, which is why it was very easy for us to pivot, a lot of us, and become optional. Before COVID, there were a lot of schools that were beginning to question SATs anyway, and they said, look, we can make a decision without them, and they made them optional. This year, most other schools followed suit, and they said, look, if you don't have them, we're not going to expect you to find a place to take them and put yourself in danger and take them. So we're going to make them optional. Other exams had their own, other than SATs, had their own ways of delivering results. So the IB developed a system where they used the information provided by teachers, and they used internal assessments very heavily and brought external examiners to look at the internal assessments, and they came up with a rubric to offer scores. The A-level did something similar. AP turned to online and gave people an online option. And a lot of countries developed ways where a student could have something to present. So is this important? Well, in some ways, it does give us another glimpse, not necessarily the SAT. Sometimes what's going to be important is that other external examination, because some schools have discovered that that's sufficient. If I see that you're doing well on the IB, why would I need an SAT? There are reasons sometimes, but a lot of schools decided if they had something, they were fine with that. So what a lot of us did is we stood by our rules. In my school, our rule was that we expected you to take whatever examination was expected of you in your own country if you were in that system. But we said we make all of this optional. We make the SATs optional. With TOEFL and English language examinations, we were stuck a little bit more because we want to be sure that you can handle the language. But so many testing agencies, TOEFL included, IELTS, Duolingo, offered an online option that we had something that we could turn to that you could do from your home. At the same time, if that wasn't possible, because not everybody has internet access, then we were perfectly happy to waive the exam. So what does this mean? Now, what it means is the first thing you need to do as you're filling out your application is you need to look at the requirements. You need to see what each school requires. Do not eliminate a school because you don't like the requirements, because that's closing a door. Look also at the external exam modes of the system you're in. So if you're in the IB right now, there's a hybrid system. You can either take the exam in the traditional way, or you can take it, with the hybrid system that they developed. With the SAT, some centers are open, but some are not. So no one's really demanding them. With other external examinations, with the A-level, there's something been developed. So you want to become familiar with what you can take, and if it's available to you, and what each school requires. If a school says it's test blind, it means it will not look at exams. And see exactly what they mean. Test blind for the SAT, test blind for everything. It means they will not look at exams at all. If, however, a school says that they're optional, so Brown, for instance, is SAT optional, what that means is if you don't send it, it's not used against you. But if you do send it, we will look at it. what does that realistically mean for you? It does mean if somebody has done well on an SAT, that's a feather in their cap, and that's good. It means that if you don't have anything, that won't be used against you. You may ask yourself whether we like seeing 800 scores. Well, of course we like seeing 800 scores, but it's your chance to think about what your strengths are, think about whether it's the right school, and then if you have exams, to think about whether you want to send them in, because we will use them if you send them. With English language exams, I would recommend to find out what's accepted and take something that you can do at home and send it in, because we don't want you to come and feel uncomfortable with English. That's not going to help you ultimately. I would think about all of this carefully, how you want to plan the exam taking. But again, I want to underline that the ultimate importance here is that you stay safe. Do not go and take an exam at an external site if you don't feel safe doing so. You can always explain that and send us what you could take at home. Keep that in mind. A lot of people don't believe me, and they'll fly to another country to take the SAT because they think that that's going to help them. That's not really going to help you. Sometimes, in fact, it gives the wrong impression. We want your emphasis to be on your transcripts and not as much on your scores. If you can send them and you have them, great. If you don't have them, don't worry about it. What does the future look like? Well, for next year, because we don't have COVID under control yet, a lot of us are maintaining the policies that we developed last year, i.e., we're optional. What's going to happen after that? I don't know. It's impossible to tell. Some people are saying that if we're optional, if a school has been optional for a long time, it will continue to be. But I don't know that. I don't know. We really don't. But what you need to do is plan and just know what the rules are. And if you know what the rules are, you'll be okay. Okay, so that is it for this. I'm going to stop my share. And actually, what I may do as we begin, people are welcome to ask questions. I may have some slides of Brown running in the background so that you have pretty pictures to look at. But I would love to take your questions and to see what your concerns are.
Well, thank you so much for a great presentation. We are going to move into the Q&A piece now. If you want to speak and unmute yourself, please raise your hand first, so then we don't hear voices from multiple screens. But feel free to use the chat function to type in your question. And I'm gonna, I guess, start off with a question I think everybody's really interested. You know that our region, East Asia and Pacific, there are lots of competitive high schools, and they don't really take optional as optional. When they say, oh, now this is optional, it is still required. You know, you're at a certain disadvantage. It's kind of a myth and a misconception, but maybe I think it will help. I don't know if you remember any of the applicants, but can you maybe give us an example of an applicant that has applied without a test score last year and still got in, and what aspect, what element in that application that really stood out that help him or her to get in?
I'm glad that you asked this, Luke, because it reminds us to pay attention to language. If you see that something's highly recommended, so our website says TOEFL or Duolingo or IELTS are highly recommended. Highly recommended means take it. take it. But we will be understanding if you really can't take it. But if you can take it and you haven't taken it, it makes us wonder. However, optional means just that. Let me give a little bit of a warning here. I've wondered about this a lot. If somebody is applying from a high school that we've never seen before, you'll know that. You'll know if other people are applying to the United States. We've never seen the high school before. We know nothing about the high school. We don't have SATs. We don't have IBs. We don't have A levels. We don't have anything, and we don't have any information. Then I would say scores are helpful because I'm lacking a lot of information. Will I feel comfortable? If, however, you have something in there like an IB or GCSEs or some external measure, don't worry about the SATs. Optional really does mean optional. Now, we haven't released our acceptances yet, so we're not quite done, but we did admit some people early decision. I've been in this business a long time, and I was there at a time. I was at Brown at a time when I think the essay probably mattered more than anything else. Now it's I would say, while it's still important, um, it doesn't probably have the power that it used to, because there are a lot of people helping with it. However, one thing that I did learn is that the decision that you make is going to be based on a pattern, and the pattern is going to be transcript. It's going to be how you write, because that's related to how you think. Nobody thinks this, but writing and thinking are related. If you can't write, then it's not clear to me you can think. If you can't use complex sentences, then it's also an indication that you're not thinking, at least in English, at a deep level. We also look at our agenda. I didn't talk about that, but and colleges never talk about their agendas, but we have agendas. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, every year we get some marching orders, and they go from things that you've heard of, like the orchestra needs an oboe player, a good oboe player, not just any oboe player, to, gee, we developed a program in, I don't know what, computational biology. Can you find people who are interested? So all of a sudden, we are looking for people with particular interests. We sometimes don't know from year to year what those will be. There was a time when people had forgotten that liberal arts means sciences as well. In fact, sciences in some ways more. People had forgotten that Brown was a big science school, that it had one of the oldest engineering schools in the country. So we had to begin really working on engineers. Now that people have remembered this again, we are looking at departments that are losing ground. So sometimes you get in because you fill that need. I can't convince you that optional really means optional, but an example, we did have a student who had applied from a country in Africa, and he had no access, internet or otherwise, to the SATs. He had taken, we did have GCSEs or something comparable. I can't remember if they were GCSEs or if they were the Zimbabwean exam, but we did have an external exam of one sort. And what impressed us is, despite the fact that this student had very little opportunity, he made the most of what he had. He did extra research on his own. He took a gap year to help others learn. So the teachers helped us piece together this picture of somebody who was very intellectual, very bright, and we understood he had no way of taking the exams. We didn't know his high school in that well, but we did have that one external indicator from either the GCSEs or a Zimbabwean exam. I can't remember which one it was. So there's one example, and there are many that are like it. I think Namjin has his hand up.
Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah,
Namjit.
thank you so much sharing such useful information with us. And I just wanted to ask, would you recommend students to take like a standardized tests if they want to get a scholarship in the United States?
Okay. All right. Again, and this is where it's difficult, 4,000 different institutions, 4,000 different rules. See, I am fairly certain that schools have had to relax their policy of tying scholarships up with standardized examinations. If that is what the rule is for some particular school that I don't know about, then that's what the rule is. However, look at what the policies are. For my school, I'm going to share my screen while I talk a little bit about financial aid and how that works, so I can show off my school a little bit. Here we go. You'll see a drone here in a second. So you get an idea of what at least one campus, and this is a city campus, believe it or not, looks like. So some schools do tie in scholarship opportunity with a standardized exam. I'd be very surprised if they stick to it this year, but do read the policies. My school and schools like it are need-based. And what that means is we will give scholarships only if you can show you need them, and we only give you what you need to come. So if you need the whole thing, you get the whole thing. If you need $10,000, you get $10,000. And the way the financial aid office allocates this money is they wait to see who we've accepted. If I say, I think this kid is really smart and is going to add to campus, what they're going to do is they're going to, the financial aid will look at what the need is and award. We don't admit you if we can't afford you, but if we want you, and that's going to be based on other factors, we don't look at SAT to make that determination. Many schools are like Brown in that way. Schools that have merit scholarships read to see what their requirements are. Is it the SAT that's going to determine the merit scholarship, or is it a talent that you have? If they're looking for a good athlete, then it doesn't matter so much what scores you have as it does your ability to play that sport. Other questions?
Okay, we have a question from a parent about TOEFL. So his son goes to school in Singapore. The medium language is English. Does the student still need to take TOEFL, IELTS, English language proficiency test? I assume that the student is not a U.S. citizen.
Yes. Okay. So again, look at a school's rules. Sometimes citizenship will not actually be a determining factor because it doesn't follow you can speak the language of where you're a citizen. It's kind of funny. I was talking to one of my former students the other day, and she has a Canadian passport, and she's never been to Canada, so one can't. She happens to know French, and obviously she knows English, but that's because of who she is and what her interests are. So a passport won't tell us much. Language of instruction might. Again, you should read a school's rules. With Brown, language of instruction, we don't go by language of instruction only because sometimes people will enter a school in an English medium school in their last 2 years. And so we don't always have a sense of what that is. On the other hand, we only recommend the TOEFL, and for that reason, because if a student's language skills are clearly strong and the language of the country is English, and the student has been schooled there the whole time, we will see that. But look at a school's policies. Generally speaking, they should be waiving a requirement if a student lives in an largely English speaking country and has gone to an English medium school for many years.
Okay, all right. Moving on, there's a question from Indonesia, advisor in Indonesia, and then this is a question about GCSE exams.
Okay.
For many of the schools, the exam has been canceled, so the students really don't have other options, and that's the only curriculum they're taking. Is there any recommendation would you give for students like this that are really out of options for testing?
Yes. So if you don't have that option, the counselor needs to document this carefully. In other words, by saying GCSEs were not offered in our country this year. If there are any sorts of predictions that the schools can give, I find that very often schools are very good at giving an assessment based on an internal examination of what the score would have been. So the school should be encouraged to offer that information to help us.
And you would still accept predicted scores at
Yes.
this point, even though there is no promise that the test centers will resume, but you will
Absolutely.
still. All right.
Absolutely. Yes.
And then there was a question about a cutoff score for Brown. I know that this is also a myth that many people believe in. There is such a thing as a cutoff score for a standardized test. Would you like to comment on that?
Sure. It is a myth, but I'm going to explain what's behind it. One year we had a student apply who, and his story was in the paper because he didn't go to Brown. He ended up going to a school north of us in Cambridge, begins with an H. Kind of good school. The kid had scores that were very low. I can't remember. Low for us. They weren't low, but they were low for us. But the kid had lost his parents in genocide and basically grew up on his own. And what he accomplished, despite all of that, despite intense poverty, hunger, homelessness, was amazing. So I can't tell you that if you've had every opportunity in your life and you don't score well, probably that's not a good thing. But if you've had no opportunity, then that's something different. So we're looking at particular circumstances, and SATs take their color from everything else. If you've had training and you go to a school that stresses tests, we are going to expect something better. What we expect from students abroad is very often we will see a strong math score when you take it, but not as strong a verbal score, particularly if English is not your language. So we take that into account. There is not a cutoff. Now, it so happens that when you look at the reason you think that there is that you see an average that's high. You may see an average that's in the 700s for each exam. And you say, okay, obviously they have a cutoff. Well, you know what? The average of the people that don't get in is probably around the same. And that's because people with high scores tend to apply. Of course, I'm not going to know this year what the students would have had because not all of them have the exam. I would say you should, if you do take the exam, you should strive to do well because most people who are successful do well. However, if you have low 600s or low 500s, even 400s, even though the 400s are rare, they happen. That should not stop you from applying if everything else is strong. And you're going to know what that means in your heart. Now, if you have bad grades, I would say don't apply.
Well, thank you. There's a question about extracurricular activities, which is a whole another sphere. Right now, many students, they're not only able to not take the test, but they're facing limitations due to COVID-19, and they're not able to engage in lots of volunteer activities, leadership activities. So, but how important is extracurricular activities, and what some measures do you kind of take into account in light of COVID-19 when you're looking at extracurricular activities?
Now, you know, that surprises me. Let's think about this. Really, you can't get involved in extracurricular activities. Think about you can't go to class either, but you are, aren't you? Aren't you going to class? Aren't you getting on Zoom and going to class? Well, extracurriculars can take place in the same way. No, maybe you can't play football and you can't stand across the net to play tennis. No, you can't do that. Maybe you can't go and tutor kids in their homes, but there's a lot that you can do online. You know, I had a student last summer and she called me up and she said, you know, I need to go to medical school. I need to work in a clinic and I can't work in a clinic. And before I could say anything, she said, so what I decided to do is I'm working on a hotline for people who need medical help. And often they're afraid to come in person anyway, but they're afraid not to get some advice. So I talk to them on the phone and I advise them on the phone. Or Zoom or whatever. So there's a lot that you can do that's transferable to online. You could have a book club online or a movie club online, and you could get together and discuss what you read or what you watched. You could get involved in a hotline where you're working with people who are less advantaged, but who can get on the phone or on the computer and talk to you. You can find different ways of doing solitary activities. This is going to take some creativity. No, you can't do everything. Nobody in the world can. So don't think you're at a disadvantage, but you can do some things. And I'll tell you something else. You have an opportunity to do something that we've forgotten how to do, and that's read. You can still read. You can read books. You can gather more information. You can take the time to exercise that sense of wonder. So yeah, they're going to be important. No, maybe you can't get on the stage, but let me tell you something. You know, there's a group of students that got into Brown last year. They were across 15 different time zones, 15 different time zones, and they got together and they sang and they put together a song on Zoom and they sent it to us. 15 different time zones, and they were admitted applicants, and they sang a song and they sent it. So even if you can't get together with your choir, you could still do it on Zoom. It's not going to be the same thing, of course not, but it's something.
Yeah, I guess I have a follow-up question on that. I think a lot of students believe that you need to have a long list of activities for extracurricular, and then you need to win gold medals, Olympic level, regional level, national level. And a lot of those are canceled. So I think a lot of students are now nervous because all these high-profile events are canceled, and then they're not able to get that on their resume. So, and they're worried that that might affect their admissions.
So remember this, you're not the only ones who are suffering COVID. Everybody in the world is suffering COVID. And if exams have been canceled, they've been canceled everywhere, unless you had a gold way back when. We expect that we're going to see less in terms of trophies and gold medals. However, what's lacking can be made up through some creative kind of activity. I wouldn't worry about if something is canceled, it's canceled. I wouldn't worry about it. I'd worry about what you can do instead. Oh, and how about a list? Okay, let's think about a list. If somebody says, I did community service, I did theater, I did football, I was president of my class, I did Model United Nations, and I did other debating as well. A list is a list, and it becomes not interesting. What's interesting is when you say a few words about it. So you should have tried things, you should have an array of things that you've tried, but I expect you will talk about 2 or 3 of them and show excitement. Otherwise, it's going to look like something that you did so that your college application could look good. We've all been there. We all acted that way. We all padded. But we can see when somebody else is doing it too.
Thank you. That was great. Are there any more questions from the audience? Can feel free to use the raise your hand function or type in your question. And while we are waiting for more questions, I'd like to kind of go back to one point that you mentioned in your presentation. And then you said that, tests are important, but at the end of the day, we are interested in students presenting a certain pattern, right? A pattern of excellence or pattern of leadership all across the board throughout the application, and they need to be kind of linked together. So I guess that's the question that a lot of us have now that testing is not possible for a lot of students, not a lot of extracurriculars that they can do. How can we still show off that pattern in our application? What are some tips that you may have for our students?
Okay, so the first thing, let's look at a transcript. We want to see that your grades have generally, for Brown at least, that your grades have generally been strong. If you have mostly A's and there are a couple of B's, the B's kind of disappear. If you have mostly D's or C's and then there are a couple of A's, no one's going to say that you're an A student. That's what a pattern is. So we look to see that you have been a strong student. We look to see that you are finding ways to do something to develop your interest outside of school. Don't be afraid to say, I get together with my friends and we discuss current events. That's something. That's legitimate. I think that's a very nice thing. You can't go to Starbucks and do it. You can't go to the cafe and do it, but you can do it on Zoom, on the phone. You can write articles to yourself. So we're going to look at your extracurriculars. We're going to see if what your teachers say matches up. If the teacher says this isn't a good student, and it may have appeared that you're good at selling yourself, then that's part of a pattern. By the way, Brown rarely sees teachers who say bad things about students. We generally see strong statements. And so that's part of the pattern though. If SATs aren't there, we still have a pattern. if everything is excellent and SATs come in and they're not so great, we're going to believe everything else before we believe with the SATs. It's when there are dings. So your transcript had some blemishes, you didn't do that much outside, your teachers wrote positive but not excited recommendations, and your outside exams are not that strong, then they take their color from everything else. I think that's the best way to put it. Exam scores take color from everything else, and otherwise, the pattern that we see is an excellent one.
That's great.
By the way, before we go on, somebody asked if there's a cutoff for the TOEFL at Brown. 100 is a kind of cutoff. We have made exceptions to that when somebody has learned English really late, but it's rare to see an exception to that.
Yeah, and in terms of communicating the challenges that they face due to COVID, is there a space that they can use to kind of communicate that themselves, or do you prefer it to be coming from the teacher or the school, kind of presenting what the students are going through?
Oh, thank you. Okay, so there is a section right now on the Common App, at least. If there's not a Common App, I think you can always send an extra letter, but there's a section on the Common App that asks that. Don't feel you have to answer it, because we know everybody's been suffering through this, but some people have had unusual circumstances or rougher circumstances. Maybe they've seen many family members die. Maybe everybody came down with it. Maybe it affected a parent's employment and you had to figure something out to help out the family. Sometimes there are things that are unusual and other times there aren't. Otherwise, we know that people have been kind of slogging through it and trying to patch up what they can.
All right, thank you. Thank you. I think that's all. We covered all the questions. I don't think there's a question that we were not able to cover. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to kind of share with our group? I know that it's late for you, so I don't want to keep you too long. So
no worries, no worries. It's fine. It's fine. This is always a pleasure. I'd like to leave you with this message. If I could tell a quick story. In my own culture, I'm Greek. There is a character that you may have heard of, whose name is Odysseus. Odysseus is a traveler. He's a warrior. He's a king. He fought in the Trojan War for 10 years and then took 10 years to get back to his island by boat. He didn't want it to be 10 years. He thought he was going direct, but he had bad luck. He had things thrown in his way. You get the impression that sometimes he liked the bad luck because it gave him an opportunity to think his way out of a problem. On the way, there were islands that he stopped at because he hadn't seen them and he was curious. He had to hear the song of the sirens. Who were they? They were these beautiful singers and who sang so beautifully that whoever heard them would jump overboard to go closer to their song and lose their lives. And he thought to have his crew stuff their ears with beeswax and to tie him to the mast. And that way he could both listen, but he could also tell them when the danger was past. So he was a clever guy. He was a guy who looked for adventure. I think in a lot lot all of you are like Odysseus, because considering another country for university is a big deal. It's far away, it's different, it's exciting, it can be frightening at the same time. And I hope that you keep that spirit alive and remember that you are an Odysseus. Now, he was not looking for a better job because he was king, and he was not looking for more money because he was king, but he did want to make his head, as one college president said, an interesting place to live for the rest of his life. If you keep that flame alive and remember that you are learning things because they're different, because perhaps they're useless but might become useful, because you will never have the opportunity to experience it. If you nurture that sense of wonder and show us your love of ideas, and remember that you're Odysseus and that you're a risk taker, and that yes, you have a goal, but you're going to take your time getting there, you're going to be successful in the process. So bring out that love for ideas, bring out that desire to learn. Don't be afraid to show it. Good luck wherever you go. I hope some of you do consider Brown, but what I want most is for you to be happy with the place that you choose, because otherwise you're not going to learn anything. To be excited to find a good match and to bring that love of adventure and that love, that sense of wonder and love for ideas out. Thank you all very much. And thank you, Luke and Education USA for creating this opportunity.